We are live.
We are live. All right.
Okay, no, this is older.
Well, welcome back. And so one of the things that we are unfolding right now is I teach on two sides now. One is the Institute side, which is the Institute of Integrated Regenerative Design, and that's where I teach professionals. And so that's where I get rooms full of engineers and architects and scientists and all that kind of stuff, and we teach advanced design stuff. But then, as I think Jack leaked a little on the Survival podcast, we are rolling out a faith-based side organization for communities, and I'm going to be ready to talk more about that. I'm not going to talk on the live stream, but if you want to hear a little more about that, I'll talk about it a little bit later. We are doing, and we are going through some stuff, but there's a course that's designed for the community side, for the Anamythos Fellowship. And it actually is an 8-part, 12-hour class because it's designed to get a community together to think about how to put together community food structures. So a lot of times when people come in and they're going to do a course talking about community food security, they're like, how do we grow more food? Okay, I think we've got that. We're in the process of getting that sorted, right? I'm not worried about us growing more food, okay? Yeah, there's always more to learn. There's always more to do, but there's more to community food security than just growing a little more food, right? And so this whole class is thinking about how to look at community food security from everywhere from dense urban core all the way out to rural. And so, like I said, there's 8 sessions in this. For this group, I'm going to go through some of this a little fast because, and I might even get, each of these is designed to be 90 minutes, but I'm going to guess is that if I go through things, some of the stuff I'll be able to get through a little faster, and I might jump over into session 2 and hit a couple topics from there, right? So part of what I'm wanting to do with this group is to kind of have like a really brainstorm discussion, bring up some things, give you some definitions I've been working with and some thoughts I've been working with. As we get deeper into the course, it goes all the way down into, okay, sure, we know how to do annual crop production, but how do we integrate that in to everything from the center of urban areas? I've got people calling me that are, in the center of, that are working with food security issues in the center of cities the size of Boston and New York and, Chicago, and we're looking at how do you actually start to get people reconnected to their food supply there, which includes growing a little bit of food in the dense urban core of, say, New York City, right? And it's doable. So all the way out through all the different steps, down through, through light urban, out through suburbia, through peri-urban, all the way out into rural. And how do you connect all that into a situation to create community food security, right? So I want to hit some ideas and some thoughts around this, and we'll go fast in some places, and but I'll slow down and we'll discuss stuff if there's places where it's really where we want to dig in. Okay, so this is going to be a little more interactive. Normally I just start going, we go 90 minutes for this, but I think I can get past it in a little less than 90 minutes with this crew because we have a lot of people who've been thinking about this. This was originally designed for people who maybe haven't been thinking about community food security as much as we have, right? So maybe it's a very introductory course for some of them, right? And where do you think I start? What would be a great story if you want to think about community food security? There's a number of great stories. I had to think about what story do I tell to hook this at the very beginning, and what do you think I chose? Who's familiar with this? Cuba's special period? Yeah. Who's familiar with that? Okay, interesting, right? This documentary, The Power of Community, How Cuba Survived Peak Oil, is really interesting to go back and watch. Because what you had a situation with the fall of the Soviet Empire. You had a situation in which it was about 1991, the breakup of the Soviet Union coupled with the embargo put in place by the U.S. restricted imports and exports from Cuba, and such that the imports and exports collapsed by almost 80%. Oil imports fell by over 50%, and GDP plummeted by 34%. So fuel and replacement parts for vehicles and machinery became expensive, difficult to find. The electric grid became unstable with frequent rolling blackouts. And what do you think happened to their food production system? Right? Because they had gone in full on the Green Revolution. Yep. What that meant was that everything was industrialized, everything was mechanized, and it depended upon chem ag inputs. And all the chem ag inputs, of course, were being imported, and they're all petroleum based. So all of a sudden, you go from overnight from the whole country of Cuba is gone into this area where now we have a hard time getting oil and all the industrial inputs. We can't get repair parts to repair our tractors. What are we going to do? And so what ended up happening was that the Green Revolution collapsed in Cuba almost overnight. Very fast. With the collapse of imports, all the inputs like fertilizers, herbicides, pesticides, and fuel became expensive and almost impossible to get, resulting in Cuba's entire industrial food production system falling apart. Diesel fuel and tractor parts were also largely unavailable, meaning that all of the mechanization that was used to drive production was no longer available. And unreliable electrical services made refrigeration difficult. Right? In the tropics. Right? So all of a sudden, some things changed pretty big scale. What happened was, didn't make big news, but some permaculturists showed up on the plane and said, we're going to have to do some things here, right? To be able to actually get your food system up and going so people don't starve here. And they started doing things. So what you saw was, as the availability of food fell, the only option was to break up large industrial farms into many smaller farms that could be cultivated by hand labor at human scale. Chemical inputs were replaced by organic farming methods. This is one of the only few places where a centralized command and control government can do a thing of basically saying, all right, we're breaking up all the farms. They're going to small holdings now. Done. No dickering, no questions. We're doing it because if we don't, we're not going to be able to produce food to feed the people. And so the Cuban government did. And they said, we're breaking up these big industrial farms. We're breaking them down. And it's like, you're a farmer, you're a farmer, you're a farmer, you're a farmer. Everybody go out and work, right? Because otherwise we're all going to starve. And everybody was like, well, I guess if the option is either we do that or we starve, off we go, right? And so tractors were replaced by oxen, and thousands of people were employed to work the new small farms surrounding the cities. So, like within a few months, this is what agriculture in Cuba looked like. Yeah.
They probably had terrible bricks to deal with, though.
Yes, they did. Starting out, they had the food was very low quality because they were trying to convert industrial agricultural chem cultivation over to ecological cultivation. Well, now we got a problem of feeding Havana, right? Everybody familiar with Havana? At that point in time, it was 2.2 million people. Okay. Now let's scratch your head. Like how many? Nicole, how many people do we have on site right now, approximately? 50. How much food does it take to feed 50 people for 4 days?
I mean, this morning's breakfast was 30 pounds of beef. I think we went through 20. We probably have some leftovers. But.
Right. Okay, that's just that. We're feeding 2.2 million people, okay?
Oh, hundreds of eggs. And
Yeah.
brought eggs this year because I
Right. Exactly. So to think about the amount of food that has to be produced to feed 2.2 million people, okay, it's logistically really big, right? So every available bit of urban land was converted to organic agriculture using a combination of annual and perennial crops. Almost every family started growing at least some of their own food in a combination of container gardening, rooftop gardening, patio gardens, and community gardens, created in any available lot. The advantage they have, of course, being the tropics, as long as they can get water on it, they can grow year-round. Okay? So this would actually be harder to do in like cold temperate, absolutely. But it's really fascinating what was possible in a city of 2.2 million. Distribution points popped up in each neighborhood where the community could trade items they had grown and purchase food grown in the new small farms that had established right in the perimeter zone around Havana. Okay? And at the height of the special period, after they got this up and running, over 50% of the vegetables needed to feed Havana were grown within the city limits or within 5 kilometers. Yeah. What's the population of Dallas right now?
Just city?
Yes.
Just under 1 million.
Okay.
Dallas in the city limits.
Yes.
Dallas Fort Worth Metro.
Yes.
About 8.2 million.
Yeah.
Okay. I was trying to get something in the same ballpark here, but imagine trying to take and say, okay, we're going to feed a city of several million people like that.
Dallas County's about 3 million.
Okay, about 3. Dallas County. We're going to feed all of those either from inside the city limits or from within a few kilometers right out. Our target is 50% of all of the food to feed them is going to be produced in that footprint. Think about that for a minute. Okay.
Well, and also if you have Dallas and many of our big cities
Mhm.
are up rather than, more spread out. I mean,
Yeah.
because
Yeah,
Havana is more spread
Yeah,
out.
it's more spread out, right? Yes.
So you have more spaces in between
Right.
everything.
Yeah.
Can you imagine?
Yes. In many smaller towns, the number reached 80 to 100% across Cuba. In other words, if you looked at the town, they were growing all their own food, or right around the city, right? Okay, so health outcomes. What do you think happened?
People got healthier.
Yeah, with food being so scarce at the beginning of the special period, the average person lost over 20 pounds before food production began to recover. But the combination of local organic diet and a newfound reliance on walking and biking actually resulted in the average health of the people of Cuba increasing dramatically. Right, and by the way, this was transportation. And I have to tell this story. I know we're short on time. I have to tell this story because it was the director of this documentary. Community Solution was the group that did this documentary. He was talking about being down there in Cuba, and for recording all of this, videoing this, and they were getting around on these different. Nobody had private cars because you couldn't afford it, and so they would have these trucks and buses and everything, and they would have like flatbed vehicles you just climb in the back of. And he was like going through a neighborhood, and a woman comes out with her about 10-month-old infant and says, I need her to go to my sister and about 3 miles down the road. Can somebody take her? And somebody's like, okay, here you go. Hands her baby off and goes back inside, right? And so he's sitting there, and they're going down, he's watching this woman who's taking the baby. Right, and they're going down the road a little bit. They stop. Some other people need to climb on. So she hands the baby to him, like, here, hold on to her for a minute, right? So he's holding this baby, right? And they take it down, and the people that were in the back of the vehicle make certain that the baby gets off and to where it needs to go. And so one of the interesting things about this, the thing that had happened here was the level of community cohesion was that a woman is actually comfortable going out in the community and saying, I have a little emergency. Take my baby and get it where it needs to go. I mean, that probably freaks us out as Americans, right? We would be like, no way
I
would
would
we do that.
to deliver 2 pounds of her coffee.
Right,
Right.
exactly.
Oh,
Right?
It gets stolen by the post office
Yeah.
sometimes.
Okay, so this is stuff I'm going to go through pretty quickly. I think we all know this stuff pretty good, right? Threats to global food security. What are they? Supply chain. Everybody want to read this? Everybody sing along on the chorus, right? Okay. Soil loss, falling average irrigation water, intentional destruction of food quality by agribusiness. Okay, we all know this. We know why this is happening, right? Family and community food security. Again, we all know that the beans, bullets, and Band-Aids approach will ultimately fail, right? The surest way to achieve food security is at the community level. Because, as we all know, if you're the only one with food, pretty soon you're the target, right? Everybody realizes you're still eating when they're not, then they're going to show up at your door with some questions. And so the community level is the right level to address food security, right? So that's why I wanted to. So when we're taking this out and talking to people who haven't thought about community food security, when you talk about why do we need to think about it, what are the threats, but also what's the right scale, right? And that putting machine gun emplacements around your cabin and thinking that that's going to solve the problem is not really a viable long-term strategy.
It's fun.
Fun, yeah.
That's a different problem you're solving.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Okay. And then the other one I have to deal with a lot is this, which is the emergency. Yeah, it's the emergency foods don't solve the problem, right? Emergency foods have a place in responding to crisis situations. Like, and I have a little bit, because like if some big crisis pops up for like 48 to 72 hours, things are absolutely, just bonkers crazy. I can pull out a little emergency food supply and have a little something to keep me going. That's not your long-term solution. What most people do not realize is that when you change diet under stress, a lot of people will actually go into crisis mode, especially elderlies and children. And you'll see older people and children, if you try to drastically change their diet under high stress conditions, will stop eating. And so this is, and I've had people go in and say, yeah, here's our MRE stash. And the first thing is like, well, first of all, have you ever tried an MRE? Like, no, we're going to wait.
Oh my God.
Right? Oh my God.
No idea.
Terrible. So we have to get them past that idea, right? That we just go buy the year's supply and put it in the back closet and, break glass in case of emergency. And so we have to get them past that idea. I don't think anybody probably in this room has the illusion that that's a solution. But when you're dealing with people in your community, you have to disabuse some of them of this notion, because they will have just thought, well, I have disposable income. I'll just go spend $5,000 on the deluxe mountain house or whatever, and that will solve my problem. But no, you have to be really thoughtful on that. So the other thing that I run into a lot is when we're dealing in places in crisis over the long term is what I call the problem of forklift aid. This is what the UN did for a long time. The UN has now actually admitted that this model of aid fails. It's a hard failure. Okay, and so it destroys food security because it tends to destroy any local food systems that are still in place, along with the culture of growing and sharing food in the community. So we've seen this in places in Africa that went into food crisis. When they came in and started doing forklift aid, what farming practices were there disappeared. And because a lot of indigenous cultures are organized around growing and producing and sharing food, and that immediately dissipated as well. And so now you're not only is your food growing being attacked, but your community cohesion, which is almost more important, is being torn apart, because people whose community cohesion was revolved around the production and serving of food to each other, now that's just gone. And so that immediately throws the whole structure of the community into even further crisis. So that's a hard fail. Yeah,
so
Joe.
there's another problem this causes. One of my deployments in Honduras, we were served chow, breakfast, and dinner, but we lived on MREs for lunch for 6 months. And a lot of times guys would skip lunch and we'd save up MREs and we'd start passing them out to the natives around there.
Mm-hmm.
We stopped doing it because they fought with each other.
Yes.
And we got care packages of all kinds of candy and crap, and some of it was like banana layers. Nobody wants to eat those, so you're giving those to the kids. The kids started beating each other up, and the big kids beat up the little kids and took all of it, and then they were like little gangsters, trading
it
stuff
out
for it and all, right? So if at this scale, it's got to make that problem way worse.
Exactly.
It builds small little tribal leaders.
Yeah.
Basically,
Yes.
Because
Yes.
whoever gets
Yeah.
first access to it
Right.
becomes the local
Warlord, basically.
Mafia.
Yes.
Yeah, the candy mafia and the MRE
Right.
mafia, the chocolate mafia.
Right.
It does lead to a lot of
Yeah.
violence.
Yeah.
Right.
I'll say you can actually see that
Yes.
happen in real time on I think it's a No Reservations by Anthony Bourdain.
Oh, I remember that one.
In Haiti, I think it is.
Mm-hmm.
And the food that they made, they decided they were going to pass out to people. The locals started lining up,
Mm-hmm.
and immediately in line, people were starting to.
And it
Fight.
wasn't even food they brought in. It was
Right.
local food being sold. But Anthony just bought the whole lot of this group and said, stand it out. And the only thing got about the other is some of the tough guys got in and made everybody line up.
Yes.
Right. It can cause real problems.
Yep. This doesn't just happen in underdeveloped or pre-developed countries. It can happen right here.
Sure.
In North Carolina.
Yes.
North Carolina during the
Yep.
Red Wave.
Absolutely. Right. So this is the failure of forklift aid. So So as we're thinking about developing community food security and also how we respond to crisis, we have to think about how to design patterns that don't fall into that. And like, for example, one of the things we've done when we've gone into communities is the people who get some help are the people who are showing up to learn how to grow food and solve problems, right? And while you're there learning, you get fed and you get resources. And to those who are giving, more is given. That is, if you are helping to organize and you are helping to actually solve the problem, that's where you concentrate the aid. You don't just go out there and just throw it everywhere, right? It has to be done very carefully so people don't fight over it. But that's just something we got to think about. All right. So let's define food sovereignty first, right? So we have some of these terms. And one of the things I've figured out, you'll see that a lot of times I spend a good amount of time defining my terms because we figure out as we're going to engineer a thing, we better have defined it. Otherwise, you don't know what your goal is. And so people like throw around the term food sovereignty. And so what I want to do is I want to talk about when we say we want food sovereignty, what are we asking for? Because that term can be interpreted a lot of different ways. So I thought about it a little bit and I said, well, what in the world, how are we going to define food sovereignty? And by the way, if you're one of the people who like observes carefully, you'll notice that a lot of times there's little Easter eggs in my pictures. Everybody notice what the picture was? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So here are the things that I think are fundamental to food sovereignty. The first is the right to steward water and soil. And in so many states now, there are laws where they're trying to actually take that right fundamentally out from underneath human beings. And to me, it is one of the most fundamental rights of a human being to be able to steward water and soil, because otherwise you basically are put into a position of dependence on other people for your life, and that is the position of being a slave of some sort, right? So food sovereignty starts with the right to access and steward water for drinking and to irrigate crops. Many jurisdictions have laws and regulations that prohibit free access to water and that outlaw ecological water management practices. Corporate interests have lobbied for the privatization of water rights in ways that make gardening, homesteading, and small-scale farming difficult and expensive. Right after water comes the right to cultivate the earth and increase soil fertility. There's the statement. All humans have the right and responsibility to steward the water and soil on the lands where they live. Okay? Everybody know what that is? The Quanderhof? That's Sepp Holzer's place. And yeah, you should see what he's done with the water on that site. And so, and the reason I put this up here is he had to fight with his government to be able to do everything he was allowed to do. And now it's an international model of what to do in order to regenerate a landscape, right? And they tried to stop him a lot of times, along with a few Karen neighbors. Okay. Number 2, right to food choice. Okay. Big Ag has also lobbied to get a wide array of regulations in place that limit our right to buy directly from small producers, both by limiting the producer's ability to grow food and the ability to sell it. Laws prohibiting raw milk sales and on-farm meat processing are some of the most visible examples, right? But many more subtle roadblocks lurk across the whole agricultural system. All humans, here's my statement, all humans have the right and responsibility to make their own informed choices of the foods they want to grow and purchase. Yep. And I'm sure everybody recognizes. Who's that?
Looks like Daniel.
It's Daniel. That's Daniel Salton. Yeah. Yep. And that is Polyface. Yes.
Yeah.
All right. Right to grow food. I'm going to go quickly through these now, right? We have the right to grow food, right? All humans have the right and responsibility to grow food on the land they steward. They have the right to save seeds and breed livestock. Okay. Okay. And here's a landrace, a Madeiran wheat, right? All humans have the right and responsibility to steward the genetic capital needed to produce locally grown food with high nutritional integrity. So what is food security, right? So we talked about food sovereignty. Now I want to talk about food security. And here's my statement. I thought about it for a little while, and I said, what is food security? Now, The reason I had to define it this way is over and over again, I've gone into places and like cities and so forth, and their definition of food security revolves around calories, right? Oh, you got enough calories. What's the caloric need for you for a day? Do you have that number of calories? You are food secure. Done.
Fritos.
Right. It could be Fritos and white Wonder Bread, right? White sugar in a cup. So in the very beginning, when we first started this discussion, I started to divide it into two subcategories of calorie security and nutrient security. Because what we were looking at was we were looking at this idea that we had such nutrient deficient food that we had people that were getting way more calories than they needed and still getting no nutrients. And so for the first time in human history, we were basically finding people who were clinically obese and clinically malnourished at the same moment. Now think about that for a minute.
Yeah.
To be clinically obese and clinically malnourished at the same moment, something had to go hideously wrong with your food system, right? So we can't define food security just on calories. So here's how I define it. Food security is defined as reliable access to an adequate amount of the right mix of foods to provide a diet of high nutritional integrity, the majority of which is produced locally or grown yourself, available at affordable prices. Because I don't care if it's sitting there and nobody can afford it, you don't have food security, right? So if only the top 2% of people can afford to eat anything that's like even remotely good for you, then we don't have food security.
Or the
All right.
guy growing the food can't afford to eat his own food.
Correct.
He has to sell it to live.
Exactly right. Okay. So how's that for a little more nuanced version of the idea of food security? Now, the next thing you got to ask is, what do I mean by high nutritional integrity? And that's what I wanted to concentrate on for a moment, because this is getting us in the right direction, right? So when we look at this, by the way, who's actually ever had to formulate feed regimes for livestock? Okay. So yes, anything like it can be, you can.
Yeah.
One of the things you know real quickly is you're like, okay, how many ounces of food is that particular animal going to eat daily, right? How many calories do we need to get into that? How much protein do we need to get into that? And what's really interesting to me is, you know, we go in and we do really careful analysis of exactly how much protein that chicken or that duck or that pig or that whatever is going to need. We do all that sort of stuff, and we calculate that out so that we make certain that if they eat the right amount of food, they get the right amount of calories, they get the right amount of the macronutrients and micronutrients and so on and so forth. But we will not do that for our own children, right? It is. It's insane. So this, of course, is a, you can see here, all of the analysis on a soy-free chick starter, organic chick starter, right? While we do this. So to feed a domesticated species a formulated diet, they must figure out how to get them the right amount of calories along with the adequate amount of all the nutrients. A human diet must do the same, but we rarely talk about it this way. Okay? And yeah, by the way, I've helped some people figure out how to do, start from feed for animals like ducks and pigs and chickens and so forth, where what we did is we figured out the feed regime where they could start by buying all of the components, and then they could start learning how to grow them one at a time. We put a pelletizer on their site because they were having a big operation, and what we did is over the course of a number of years, we took them from having to buy feed being produced so being able to actually grow everything in the local community. So now you have the closed cycle ability to feed your livestock from the local community. And it's like, and no soy, right? And stuff that grows well, because I was like, oh, well, broad beans grow here really well. We'll formulate using broad beans, okay, and so on and so forth.
But the farmer will do it because he knows he can sell it because there's a
right. There's a market right there for it, okay. And what we would end up with is like locally produced feed for all of your animals. And then what I also started doing was like going, okay, let's make as much commonality between the pig feed and the chicken feed and the da-da-da as possible, so that there was an even bigger market for production of certain of those backbone things like field peas and stuff like that, right? Okay, so average daily food intake, the average adult needs about 3 to 4 pounds of food each day to feel satisfied, right? According to their size or whatever. Usually most people in a meal, a regular sized adult wants to eat about a pound of food-ish, okay? So if the food is nutrient dense and they eat mindfully, this amount tends towards the lower end of this range, like less weight, okay? Obviously, smaller people eat less on average than larger individuals. Highly active individuals may consume more. According to their metabolism, most adults need somewhere between 1,600 and 3,000 calories daily in order to meet their energy needs. This amount of food also needs to provide all the nutrients the body needs to function optimally. So what we need to look at is we're going to need to feed everybody a certain amount of food. It needs to have the right amount of calories, but what else does it need? It needs the nutrients in the same amount of food, right? That's where the whole thing of nutritional integrity goes flying off the handle. We need food that has all the different, meets all of that in order to be feeding ourselves and our children at least as mindfully as we feed our chickens. Okay? So we need to look at energy density and nutrient density and think about it, because calories, of course, is energy density, right? How much energy do I get out of this when I eat it? And then, of course, nutrient density is how much nutrient do I get out of this when I eat it, okay? So when we think about two different dimensions of how food meets our metabolic needs, energy and nutrient density. Energy density measured in calories per gram of food. Nutrient density is measured in the nutrient per gram of food. If a food is high in energy density but low in nutrient density, it provides nothing but empty calories, right? People end up eating more, trying to satisfy their body's craving for the needed nutrients it's not getting. And so people will get on the treadmill of eating more and more calorie-dense, nutrient-devoid food because their body's going, I'm not satiated yet. Okay? Modern agricultural practices has resulted in a continuing decrease in the nutrient density of almost all of our foods, even those typically thought of as being healthy options. Even our health foods now are much less nutrient dense. So I have a couple cool little slides I pulled off the internet that's kind of fun. You can kind of see down here, like, yeah, there's cubes of sugar, right? And then as you go up this way, you're getting into nutrient density per serving and nutrient density per calorie. As you get up, lamb liver is actually about the highest.
It's about the highest.
About the highest,
I know
right?
how to make that.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay, well, how do you serve lamb liver? Here's the trick. When you do any ground meat, add about 7 to 9%
Yeah.
liver into the ground meat and proceed as normal.
I did learn something else, that
Yes.
if you don't freeze it before you use it, it
Yeah.
doesn't taste as bad. So when you get
Mhm.
it from the butcher frozen,
Yes.
if you're sensitive to that taste as I am.
Yes.
But if you're going to grind it, you better freeze it. Put
Yes.
liver in a grinder.
Yes.
Oh my God.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
It's
Yes.
very nasty.
Yeah.
But yeah, somewhere in that neighborhood, and once you learn to do it, you can actually start to put
So I've never
liver into meat dishes that way, and that just the taste disappears, especially if you season the food well. And so you don't even tell anybody it's got liver in it. And that's how you use your liver, right? Okay. So cooked eggs, chicken. So this is something we need to like start thinking about, right? Here's another one I won't get into too deeply because I don't need to talk about NRF 8.3 right now. Okay. Who's familiar with rabbit starvation? Okay, I'm not going to go through this too much then. We always talking about rabbit starvation and the fact that we have to have critical fats in our diet. Otherwise, so all right. So now let's talk about nutritional integrity in real food now. Okay. So when I say that it's a diet that provides people with nutritional integrity, what do I mean? And so these are the attributes, after studying it and researching it for a while, I came up with as the minimum attributes that I want to see in a diet that we're going to say has nutritional integrity. And I use that word now instead of nutrient density because you're going to see that nutrient density is one aspect of nutritional integrity. Okay, so if we just say nutrient dense, we're not covering everything. I'm now using the term nutritional integrity. We need food with nutritional integrity. What's that? Let's go through them quickly. The concept of nutritional integrity, right? The industrial food system come up with so many ways to mess with, shortcut, cheapen our food that we need to carefully define this concept just to have a way to describe the food that we all should be produced. We shall be producing, right? And here are the 7 top level. We're going to break them down. Comes from healthy genetics. It's produced ecologically. It's made from real food. Provides a proper macronutrient balance. It provides high nutritional density. It is produced completely free of toxins and biocides, and it's served whole and unprocessed. That's what's required in order to have a diet of nutritional integrity, right? So let's go through them super fast. Comes from healthy genetics. The source genetics of both plant and animal-based foods are critical to the quality of the food. All plants and animals used as food should come from carefully stewarded genetic stock, free from artificial manipulation. This means no GMO foods, period. Okay? As of right now, the organic label, one of the few things it's still good for, is that the line on GMOs has mostly been kept. But big food industry and agribusiness is attacking that constantly. They're trying to get the GMO restrictions on organic removed so they can go in. But as of right now, the best bet that you are looking at a GMO-free food is for it to be labeled GMO-free or for it to be labeled organic if you're having to buy it from the store. Even better, buy it from your farm right next door that you know how they're growing your food, right? But if it's coming from bad genetics, I can literally go on an hour and a half lecture of why bad genetics in your food is a complete mess. Okay? Yeah, we can get into xenohormosis and all kinds of stuff. It's crazy, okay? So it needs to be produced ecologically. And we talked about this yesterday, so I'm not going to go to it. The whole thing is, when I say that it needs to be produced ecologically, is because we cannot get the full spectrum of nutrients into a chemically cultivated food crop. And we also need to be ecologically producing our livestock, because the livestock, if they're going to be healthy and nutrient dense, need to be grown on top of what? Nutrient dense soil, or actually plants, be fed off of plants. So in other words, it starts with the soil, it goes to the plants, it goes into the animals, right? So we have to do that. So we talk about that a lot. That's number 2, produced ecologically. Number 3, made from real food, not synthetic chemicals. So Michael likes to say, who's writing the food book, the kitchen book with me, he says, he'll look at a label and he say, yeah, I want more food in my food, right? So here is the rule. It's super, super simple. If you have to read an ingredient label, ask yourself this question. Read the ingredient out loud and go, would I eat that? Would I go into the kitchen and say, ooh, I think I would like some high fructose corn syrup, right? Some modified cornstarch, some sodium citrate, sodium alginate, dicalcium phosphate, modified cellulose, caramel. No. You would never go in the kitchen and go, I think I'm in the mood for some red dye 40. It's like that sort of stuff, right? No. That's not food. Okay?
But it's 100% fruit and vegetables.
Right. So this is what I love.
100%. Yes.
Right. Notice what it says. 100% fruit and vegetable juice, a blend of 3 from concentrate juices and 7 not from concentrate juices with added ingredients. Wait. With added ingredients? You said it was 100% fruit juice. And you go on the back and it starts seeing, it's like, oh yeah, we have monopotassium phosphate. It's like, yeah. What you start realizing is the front of the label giveth and the back of the label taketh away, right? It's like you cannot trust what is on the front of any of these food things. You have to go back to the label. I don't care if it says 100% fruit juice. Right. It's like crazy. So,
No, it doesn't.
in other words,
say that.
if you wouldn't eat the ingredient as a food, okay, as if you would not eat the ingredient as a food by itself, then don't eat the thing that contains it. How's that? That's simple. Because everybody gets on to, well, what should I eat? What should I not eat? What ingredients are okay? And so on and so forth. I mean, it's simple. If you would not eat the ingredient as a food by itself, then don't eat the thing that contains it. How's that for simple, straightforward, right? Done. Okay, so real food contains food. Now, proper mix of macronutrients. And of course, what are the macronutrients? Fat, carbs, and proteins, right? Now, I know we can all go off on the whole thing. Do we want to be 100% keto? Then there's people who come in and basically scream at you if you're not vegan and the whole 9 yards and stuff. Okay. I don't have time to sort this out. I have another hour and a half lecture where we sort all this out in detail. Okay. But what I will say is basically this. If you go back and you look at what our healthy ancestors did, they were basically they ate a wide diversity of food because it's what they could do, right? They preferred meat when they could get it because meat is incredibly high nutrient density and animal fats are incredible. If the animal is healthy, most of the animal fats we can get are incredibly high value fats. So dairy fats and animal fats are the preferred fats if you are looking for a healthy diet for a human being, which is an omnivore. Okay, so what we're going looking for is in some people, if they've eaten a westernized diet for a long time, they have been exposed to such high levels of carbs and sugars that they now basically are in carb and sugar toxicity. And so when you put them on a keto diet, their body's like, oh my God, thank you, right? I can detox now for a while. So I make a distinction between what I call a healing diet and a sustaining diet. Okay? A healing diet can sometimes be a more restrictive diet that your body needs for a little period of time because you just shot your body with just a completely unbalanced diet for decades. And your body is now in this big place of dysregulation, and it needs to be able to get back into regulation. So for some people, they need to be completely off carbs for a while to rebalance. And then most people can go back onto a proper amount of proper carbs, not processed sugars, right? Not processed carbohydrates, but real full carbohydrates in a proper balance, which is typically like 20 to 25%. Okay? The rest is in high quality proteins and fats. But some people, especially in this community, have been trying out a keto diet and realizing that for them, that seems to be a healing diet. It's like, when I do that, all of a sudden, a lot of things start clearing up, so forth. So if it's a healing diet for you, there's some people I've run into that vegan was a healing diet for them. They could do it for a year or two because their body was so dysregulated and certain things healed up for them, but they couldn't keep it on a vegan diet because they needed the fats, right? So I make a distinction between you need to figure out if your diet's in dysregulation, you need to figure out what your healing diet is if you need it. And then it may be that after you've healed, you might be able to go back to a little bit less restrictive diet after you have kind of come back to a more balanced place. Okay, but our diet has to give us our proper balance of macronutrients. And the big thing about the Western diet right now is it's way too high in carbs and processed sugars. So even if you don't have huge dysregulation, probably 25% is about as much on the carb side as you probably want to be eating. Okay, and then the rest is in high quality fats and proteins. By the way, right? How many of us grew up with this pyramid, right? Okay, what's coming out now in the science was that the USDA scientists knew that this pyramid, when it was published, was not only wrong, but that it was actually designed to make people fat and sick.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, and so
Nonsense.
what we
If that
know,
food's healthy, that's cattle feed.
yes,
The ratios.
yes,
Yep.
exactly right, right, and we are not ruminant animals. Okay, so anyway, this whole thing, if you had that in your brain, then just throw it out. It's complete garbage. Okay? So, yeah, and it was actually lobbied from the food industry to get this put in place, and there were USDA scientists that basically, I've heard, I haven't been able to verify that there were USDA scientists who I can't, and they resigned because they I can't,
Really?
yeah, I can't, because they knew better. They knew what this would do, right? So again, remember, I'm doing this oftentimes with communities that haven't thought through this as much as this group typically has, right? And so it's a big shock to them, this idea that there would be, the USDA would put out something that they knew was that defective, right? Okay. Provides high nutrient density. We kind of talked about that, right? There's our organic grass-fed beef liver. Yay. Okay. Yep. Number 6, produced completely free of toxins and biocides. Okay. I do not know of any of the herbicides, pesticides, fungicides that are safe, that are synthetic, the synthetic herbicides, pesticides, and fungicides. Don't know any of them that are safe. Okay, so all food should be zero toxic chemicals. And number 7, served whole and unprocessed, right? And I think we all know about that, so I'm not going to belabor that point. Okay, so what I want to do now is let's talk about setting up a local food shed. Because this is my definition. I haven't seen this from anybody else. This is my definition of how we set up a food shed. So we all know what a watershed is, right? Watershed is when you have a point of concentration. It's the whole area from which the water comes to drain at that point. A food shed, your food shed, is of course the whole area on the planet from which food drains down the supply chains and arrives on your plate. That is your food shed. Okay. So how should we set up food sheds so that they could be providing community food security? And how about that? That's my diagram of how to set up the food sheds. Okay. All right. So everybody read that, and I don't have to say anything, right? We're all done. Okay. So this comes off of the idea of 5 zones, kind of like the permaculture zones, but little different. So your home is zone 0, right? That's the stuff you grow at home would be zone 0 grown stuff, right? Okay, so we get into zone 1. This is less than 2 miles. 2 miles around you. Now, what do you see here? Walkable. That's like, so what I was like is, you can walk that, if you are in good shape, you can walk 2 miles in half an hour. Okay, you walk about 4 miles an hour. You can walk out there in about half an hour. So this is like, I can walk out to this and get that food and bring it back. So half hour out, half hour back. So that's that zone. That's zone 1. This is the home and neighborhood gardens, right? So our plant production is in home and neighborhood gardens. Our animal products are small livestock, right? And we would like 30 to 90% of our diet to come from there, according to where we are. In a rural area, we can get to 90%. In an urban area, we're going to struggle to get to 30%, right? But that's your walkable area. But I would love to see us get to the point where even in some of our urban areas, we could get to 30% of the food is available within 2 miles. So the next one out is zone 2. This is 2 to 6 miles. And what are we doing here? We're biking. This is bikeable. Again, what's the average speed that a person in reasonably good shape can maintain on a bicycle? 18 to 20 miles an hour. So I basically said was, I can go up to 6 miles easily in half an hour on a bike. Actually, a little less than if I'm in good shape. Most people, 12 miles an hour on a bike's easy. Easy, gentle ride. So again, this is now in our bikeable zone. Now we can get into community gardens and food forests. We can get into dairy animals, small meat animals, and so forth. That's our zone 2. We'd like between 50 and now we'd like to be up to like 15 to 90% being in this area. Okay. Our next one out is zone 3. This is our local transport area, 6 to 100 miles. What is this? It's a truck. Okay. What we're up to now is I want this to be within a 2-hour shipping zone area, right? Okay. What do we have now? Now we have our local farms. This is our larger scale production. We have large meat area animals and large dairy animals that would be really difficult to put into cities. So these would be the farms that are surrounding your big cities, that are directly supplying that city, okay? And so now we can get 25 to 35% from there, and now we're out to zone 4. Now zone 4 is our over 100 miles. These are our imports. These are national and international specialty products. And Nicole will be happy to know that coffee is allowed to be a zone 4, right? And special animal products as well, because we know that it drastically enriches our diet if we can get, say, 10%, maybe up to 10% of cinnamon and coffee, and you guys can name it all, right? An imported cheese, it's like, Parmesan cheese or so on and so forth, right? So what we're doing by saying we can do up to 10% is we're allowing for robust international trade in high density, high value products like roasted coffee or chocolate and so forth. And so that's a zone 4 thing for most people. Those kinds of specialty foods, they're a little bit of a luxury item. We don't have to have them to keep us alive, except maybe the coffee. Okay.
Keep
Um,
you alive.
Other people.
Yeah.
alive.
Yeah.
just to keep everybody else
Right.
around.
Exactly. Okay. And so now we have the ship, right? And that means we can do international transport and so forth. So that's our zone 4 foods. Now, what do you think zone 5 is? It's our wildcrafted foods,
Okay.
right? Hunting, fishing, foraging, right? And what you see is there's this little wedge right here that comes all the way in. This is where our wildlife corridors and niches are everywhere. Because if we don't have, we should be. I think everybody should be able to forage food within 3-minute walk of their house. Otherwise, we've designed our cities wrong. Okay. Yeah. So that's our zone 5. So we have wild crafting of plants and we have hunting and fishing of animal products. Okay. And so that is just how to think about these concentric circles and how the food gets to you and how much energy is involved in getting there. Okay. Let you get the picture before I go forward. And then here are some examples of how we would produce in those different zones. So here's our example plant products like zone 1's kitchen gardens produce leafy greens, salad vegetables, herbs, peppers, etc. The home food forest could be caneberries, fruiting shrubs, small fruit and nut trees, maybe on semi-dwarf stock. Home production garden, bulk and storage vegetables, small scale grain production, which where was she had to leave? Okay.
Only had the thing happen.
Okay, so she was doing small scale grain
Yeah.
production, right? That's a completely legitimate thing to do, and you'll get Gene Lodgston's book on small scale grain production. Some really fun stuff in that. On our animal products, we can do chicken and ducks, right? Even in urban areas, we can do rabbits, we can do dwarf goats, we can do honeybees, and so forth, right? All right, and we go to zone 2. Now we're into community gardens, and we are into poultry flocks. We're into cows and goats and sheep for milk and meat, and for milk and meat, and then pigs to recycle food waste, and also for meat and for cooking fats. And we just go on out like this. Okay, so this was me thinking about how to begin to help people think through the different kinds of productions that could be done in different densities of human habitation. Okay, how am I doing on time? Because I went through that pretty fast. Let's see here. What time am I supposed to end?
Like 5, I think.
Okay.
I don't know. I'll double check.
Okay. So let me stop there because what I'm going to do is we're going to do like I said, I went through that pretty fast. Normally I would be going through that more slowly with people who hadn't thought about this before, but I wanted to get into session 2 where we start to unpack it even more. So yes.
Just a question on, have you had any positive experiences dealing with either local, county, state government?
Yes. Yeah, what's really interesting now is that I won't name the particular cities that I've been interacting with because I'm interacting with particular people in governmental positions where they're trying to deal with food sovereignty and food security in certain big cities. And they're running into this exact question, which is it's basically the food, how should I put this? Food banks are doing their own version of forklift aid.
4:15.
Okay.
If you were to go a little over, Jack's
Okay.
session starts at 4:30.
Okay, perfect. I can do that. All right. So, yeah. So what we're looking at again is that they will take and they will go into an area and they'll have a food bank, and the food bank shows up and it's like food. Well, of course, it's typically what? Calorie dense, nutrient deficient stuff, right? Cheap things, shelf stable, last forever, that sort of stuff, right? And what do you think happens to local food production? Right? Okay, so the first thing I'm always about is the same thing when I'm thinking about if we're going into, another country and we're going to destroy their food culture. Well, we do the same thing in the inner cities of our own, here in the United States. And so I'm looking really at okay, how do we instead start taking and teaching them to grow food in inner city urban areas? And so we're looking at wicking beds, we're looking at rooftop gardens, we're looking at container gardens, we're looking at small, plots that are shared gardens, community gardens, and so forth, just to, it's like, get them to grow something, right? It's such a profound thing, especially for children, to grow something. So it's a win to me if they're growing something they eat, right? It's a start. Instead of our whole solution is to dump, processed shelf-stable food on you and then say you're done. We're done. Our job is done here. Okay, you're not starving today, therefore our job is done. And my posit is no, actually you're making the problem deeper because you're creating a cycle of dependency, right? And yes, right? But what's happening now is they're realizing that we're getting to the place where creating more of a cycle of dependency is not sustainable for these cities, right? They're going like, this is failing. This is failing big time. And so we're now in that interesting point where they're having to fight back and forth between the tendency for bureaucracies to love to create more dependency and the sheer fact that they can't maintain this forever.
Well, and if they're going to do
Yeah.
that, then they should be doing this stuff that they, instead of you can go to the store and buy a whole bunch of crap with your EBT
Yep.
cards, that you go to a farmer's market or something like that and buy the food. Or you get, I don't know, but
They can buy trees.
right.
They can buy trees.
Yeah.
And seeds and stuff.
Absolutely.
Yes.
There's other
Exactly.
things they can do.
Tennessee that
Yeah.
There's way more things they can do.
What was that?
better.
a lot of farmers markets in Tennessee will take the EBT and stuff.
Mhm.
Yes.
Mhm.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, let's hit a couple things here. So this is called organizing community food systems. So the first session was all about just like, let's get the idea of what is community food security and so on and so forth. Now we're down to, we're just like, okay, big picture, how do we actually start to organize a community food system, right? So let's go through this fast, right? Globalized, this is a quote from Vandana Shiva. Who knows Vandana Shiva? Oh yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, okay. India. She's from India, Dr. Vandana Shiva.
Well, University of Wealth.
Wonderfully vocal.
Yes. So globalized industrial food is not cheap. It is too costly for the earth, for the farmers, for our health. The earth can no longer carry the burden of groundwater mining, pesticide pollution, disappearance of species, and destabilization of the climate. Farmers can no longer carry the burden of debt, which is inevitable in industrial farming with its high cost of production. It is incapable of producing safe, culturally appropriate, tasty, quality food. And it is incapable of producing enough food for all because it is wasteful of land, water, and energy. Industrial agriculture uses 10 times more energy than it produces. It is thus 10 times less efficient. Okay, so this is a diagram that I drew of the flow through of the industrialized food system. And you can stare at it for a little while if you want to, but basically what it is right, it's extraction of natural resources, industrialized manufacturing systems that produce all the feedstocks that go into industrial So what is farming, industrial farming? Industrial farming is the production or the manufacture of a food-like substance on a sterile dirt substrate outdoors. It's an outdoor factory, is what it is. Okay? It does not produce food. It produces a food-like artifact. And that's what you get in the typical grocery store. And so you notice how much circularity is there in this thing. It's a completely extractive process. Okay? There is no closed cycle in the nutrient loop. And if we do that, we are extracting resources and then consuming them and making them into waste, and we are depleting soil and we are destroying water resources at the same time. So, yeah. All right. So let's talk about community organization and community economics in order to make this stuff happen, right? So one of the very first things that we have to think about is patterning of place and social connection. Because one of the reasons that local community food security is not happening is because we have intentional patterning of place to create social isolation and social disconnection. Suburbia is a very highly disconnected social pattern. Okay? And that's part of the reason it's so bloody hard to get any kind of community food security going in a suburban system. Because it's a system that's designed, you have to drive everywhere. And so we know what happens, right? 99% of people hit the little button, the garage door goes up, they back out, garage door goes down, and then here is your neighborly interaction. As I drive by, right? And I come back in at the end of the day, come back in, other neighborly interaction. In I go, garage door goes up, garage door goes down. There we go.
And mow your lawn.
Yes. Yeah. Mow the lawn. Or actually in my neighborhood now, you don't do that. The lawn service shows up and mows it for you.
And spray
Right.
chemicals on it.
Yeah. And sprays chemicals all over the whole thing, right? So you don't have to even go outside and wave at your neighbors while you mow, right? Because if
Nobody goes outside at all
yes,
anymore.
because remember, I'm in the middle of a bunch of engineers, right? And engineers they hire somebody else to mow, right? Okay, so the overall patterning of most communities is highly disconnected, resulting in epidemic of loneliness, even in big cities. Repatterning our communities around local food systems has the dual benefits of improved food security and improved social connection. So we have to look at this as another form of stacking functions, right? Okay, this is what we call the urban-rural transect. And when I start designing, I'm looking at where I'm designing. We have everything from T1, which is the natural zone, right, all the way over to T6, which is the urban core zone. And so what this is these are increasing densities of number of people that are living per square mile. And as we go through, like I don't have time to, of course, go through this whole 12-hour class, but the reason we start here is we want these terms: natural zone, rural zone, suburban zone, general urban zone, urban center zone, and then urban core. Because each one of these has a different density of people in it. By the time you get to urban core, you can be over 15,000 people per square mile living in an urban core. Okay? And so when I go through and start looking at all the different production opportunities we have, I say, okay, what can we produce in the urban core? What can we produce here? What can we like this? And how do we connect farmers that are here, right, with people who need food who are here? This is all the stuff we need to start thinking about how to get a community food security system actually functioning, right? To get markets for the larger scale farms and producers here that are very, very nearby. Because if we don't, what happens is basically this. If my market for something I'm growing on my farm is 500 miles away, I basically have just gotten pushed into one option, which is the industrial food system is a middleman between me and my customer. Yeah. And the instant that happens, what happens to my ability to be profitable as a farmer? Done. Right? You are not making a living without subsidy. The people who can make a living growing real food are selling it directly to the people who want to consume that high quality food, which means that the only pattern that's going to work for that is that food shed zone diagram we just went through. Otherwise, yeah, I'm growing food in Alabama and I'm going to sell to somebody in Minnesota. Not going to happen, because now I got to go through an industrialized system. It's got to be shipped hundreds of miles. It has to go through warehouses and factories and so forth. And now I have zero power over that. All the power resides with the centralized industrial system. Okay. So when we start thinking about if we were really truly going to start patterning ourselves towards community food security, we have to think about how to connect this locally, right? Like from here, how do you connect to Nashville? Right? How far is Nashville from where we're standing right now? Hour and a half. So it's within our 2-hour zone. Yeah. Right? So that would be, they don't have a true urban core. They don't have quite that density. They have a little bit of urban center zone. So we have people living in this, right? And then this around Nashville. And then we could have food producers here. It's a thing. And we could be connecting them in direct markets using things like co-ops we'll get to in a minute, right? Okay, so population density and social density, right? The instantaneous population density of an area will be reflected in the patterns of the roads, buildings, and infrastructure. The logistics of high-density areas require careful thought along with factors created by the high social density. On the other hand, rural areas often have low population densities and a resulting low social density. This can require particular attention to transportation logistics and ways to promote social connections, right? So it's a Goldilocks problem. We know people thrive at the right level of what's called social density. For most people, if you have nobody around you, eventually you get lonely, right? On the other hand, if we put you into too dense of a population center, it's just overwhelming and you get adrenal fatigue and you get constant stress. There's a magic Goldilocks zone in the middle. And so when I design population centers, I'm always designing in the Goldilocks zone. I don't have time to get into all of that, but we're really doing a lot of research into that now. Dense enough, but not too dense. Okay. To me, if I'm designing a population center, it can't be too low density or too high density, or we've missed the mark. Too low density, it doesn't have economic vitality it needs, and so on and so forth. In a rural area, however, you do rural patterning. It is a lower social density because some people thrive in that environment. But on average, most people want to be in that Goldilocks zone. Some people just love their privacy and they want to be out in the rural area. Yes, sir.
You got to put a rough number on people per square mile.
I can give you exact numbers, but we don't have a lot of time. Suburbia, we typically see 1,000 to 3,000 people per square mile. We start getting into the light edges of urban. We're between 3,000 and 5,500 per square mile. We start getting into more dense, more towards the. Let's go this way. We start getting into these general, like up into the urban center areas. We're going upwards over 12,000 per square mile, and we get into these urban core zones. In some cities, that can be over 25,000 people per square mile. Okay.
So what's the Goldilocks?
The Goldilocks seems to be somewhere between 8 and 11,000 per square mile. Instantaneous doesn't mean you have to have miles, huge amounts of it. What we're saying is like your village center needs to have that instantaneous density so it can be mixed use, walkable, and local businesses can thrive. If you have less density than that, you don't have enough foot traffic to maintain economic viability for small, locally owned, businesses. If you get above about 11,000, unless you do some very careful designing, people start to get into allostatic load, which is like chronic adrenal stress, right, from just having people and all the noise around them all the time. And so there's that magic zone and so I try to design things so that you're in that density, but you can also make a turn and within a 4-minute walk be out in a natural space, right? We call that places of respite. You can just be out in a wild space. Like I need to go for a walk, and you go out. 4 minutes later, you're in completely natural space, right? You go, okay, I can de-stress. We also put little pocket parks and everything else in, places of respite all over the place. So that's a city design deal. Does that make sense? Okay. Yeah. Okay. Keeping value in the local economy. I think we all know this, right? We know about, so usually I have to go through this with people, but we know that when we're basically doing this, we're keeping a lot of that value right there local. Whereas if we're shopping with any of the big agribusiness, the money goes where? Out of here, right? Okay. Here it comes from Local First. This shows the difference between a locally owned business and a non-locally owned business. And it shows what percentage of the money leaves versus what percentage stays. So I'll just let you glance at that. This is what stays. This is what leaves. This is a local business. That is a non-locally owned business. See the difference? It's pretty profound. So enabling locally owned businesses is incredibly important for the economics of community food security. Okay. There are a lot of legal and economic obstacles to local food systems. Yep. Okay. Zoning and regulations are a big part of that. We have to go in, and we've been actively involved in working with getting zoning and regulation changes to allow for local food production. And so that's something that basically, the amount of time it would take me to unpack this. Normally when I'm doing this, remember, this is another whole hour-and-a-half session. I'm just hitting these things super quickly for us to think about together in the last couple of minutes, okay? So you got to have a strategy for that if you're going to work in your neighborhood. You have to have some strategy for dealing with zoning and regulations. You're going to have to deal with water laws and regulations around water, because what you see in a lot of places is that your ability to go in and do things with watershed regeneration to allow for high value use of water, to allow for growing crops and aquaculture and food forests and so forth. In a lot of cities, you have to go fighting with the basically the water regulations. And so that's another place you have to have a strategy, and you have to have people working on that issue. Okay. Insurance is becoming another area. Insurance, if you notice how much of a gatekeeper insurance is now becoming in a lot of areas. Okay. So what we see is most businesses require insurance to operate, but insurance companies have increasingly become hesitant to insure anything that isn't right down the middle of current practices. Right? This can make getting insurance on innovative businesses' ideas difficult or impossible. Even once an insurance policy is in place, the insurance company may put restrictions on how a business may operate with the threat of canceling their policy if they don't comply. We've seen this as been a problem to creating local food systems, right? You go looking for a business insurance and the insurance agent goes, we don't know that model, we're not going to insure it. Okay. Financing. Again, you go to the bank, I need a little money to get my thing started. What do you think? They go looking at your business case. We don't know what this is, right? And therefore, problems with getting financing. So what do we have to do? We have to do innovative community financing options. So we need some people in our communities that are financing savvy, who understand how to create and work with alternative finance options. Okay? So that's another thing that we need to be looking at and thinking about in our communities in order to get this off the ground. And then, of course, we get anti-local food lawfare. And I think with this group, I probably don't want to talk about that too much, right? Yep, you got that. But we got to fight that too, right? Those are our obstacles, right? So producing food with nutritional integrity. I think we all know about our food is our medicine, right? We know about that. Okay. This is something I drew. It's called the medicine pyramid. This is the way I do. I've done herbal medicine for 25 plus years now. And this is the way I think about it, right? I think that real food and nourishing herbs are down here. This is the foundation of feeding ourselves, right? Then what I call gentle corrective herbs are the next level up. When you start seeing in your family that everybody's getting a little off balance, now you go in and we're actually adding gentle corrective herbs into our diet. And in most cases, that helps pull us right back into some stability. If that doesn't work, we go to what I call active herbal preparations. These are a little bit more potent bits of herbal medicine. Okay. By the time we're getting up here, some of these will be ones that we call kitchen medicine, right? That you can do in your own kitchen. But now you're starting looking at herbal preparations. You go to your local herbalist. Your local herbalist will be consulting with you because it's a little more potent. Okay. Then up here, side by side, I have powerful herbal medicines and pharmaceutical medicines. And the reason is I put them up here is because this is getting more and more powerful. I have herbal medicines that are every bit as powerful, if not more powerful, than some of the pharmaceuticals, but they're powerful, which means they're dangerous, which means they should be used sparingly and they should be used thoughtfully, right? So if I can use a powerful herbal, I will use it. I will only use the pharmaceuticals if I have no other option. I think I've done a pharmaceutical medicine once in the past 30 years. Okay, that's it.
I think I did one.
Yeah, just that was it. It was like I had a reaction to something, and I needed to get it under control, and took it for like 2 days, and I was done. That was it. Okay, so that's the way I think about that. Now I got to finish up. What are we doing? I got like 2 minutes. All right. The elements of a resilient local food production system. I'm just going to go through them super fast to get you. So I won't talk through them. I'll just show them to you. Right. We got the food production strategy. How are we going to produce the food? Right. And by the way, that is a polyculture garden in England. Is that amazing?
That's amazing.
Yeah. Okay. We need a methodology of urban production. Right. Focused on nutrient-dense crops that can be grown on balconies, rooftops, and pocket gardens. We need in the urban areas, I need nutrient-dense food, stuff like this that I can grow on green roofs, I can grow in containers and so forth, so people have that fresh food coming right, pick it, eat it. That's what we should be concentrated on in the urban cores, right? Okay, multiple dwelling unit production. Okay. I'm a green, one of my credentials is a green roof professional. This is growing on a green roof. Every level has a walkout onto a green space. Okay. Yep. And this also gives us the possibility for managing livestock like chickens and goats. Okay. Single home production. Well, we know about, we've had people presenting on that. We all know what we can do in single family unit productions, right? We can do a bloody lot. We can do a huge amount, right? Okay.
You can do it as a renter too in a lot
Yes.
of places.
Yeah.
And in
Then
cities.
community level production. When you think about this, this is actually a community food forest in Atlanta, Georgia. And so we need to be patterning in locations of food forests and community food production right into the backbones of our community, right? This is, I don't have time to go through. This is actually one of the designs I did for a urban garden with a food forest and demonstration sites around it and so forth.
Oh, does this happen?
No, it hasn't.
Will it?
We can get the funding. The whole thing is because of the way.
That would be great.
Yeah, actually, I'll talk to you about it later.
Okay.
Right? They actually Mid-City hired me to do this design, and there was the garden, right? And as of right, and it had like outdoor dining and kitchen, and all kinds of stuff like this. And they have not figured out how to fund it. So right now it's just a park. So anyway. Yeah, exactly. We could have done this for like a tenth of the cost of the Sky Bridge, right? I know. Okay. Here's another one that Chase did for the University of Arkansas. That one did get installed. So this is a food forest that we're showing how it could be done in the universities and so forth. So we're doing a bunch of stuff like this in areas to show people how to be producing food forests, perennial food production, and so forth, patterning it in. We need to also be using edges and interstitial spaces. So we've been putting pocket parks and everything else along roadways and little so forth. So as you're walking down, just like there's food everywhere, food abundance everywhere, right? Yeah. Okay. Small production farms right outside the cities. And of course, adding aquaculture in. Aquaculture is really, really great in the tropics, but it can be important here in the temperates. This, by the way, is one of the inside of one of the aquaponics greenhouse I showed you. This is me looking at the plant roots growing. Okay, and this is a amazing aquaculture system built right into a city. Okay, and then of course we also need markets and distribution. So we need value-added products. Yep, we all know that. We got them sitting right out here. People. Good work. We got value-added products to buy from inside the community. That's amazing, right? We need direct farm sales. We all know about that, right? We need CSAs. We need farmers markets, and we need food cooperatives. Now, this is going up to the scale of a lot of producers actually having a cooperative, which is a storefront that looks almost like a grocery store, but it's all local producers. And what the cooperative typically does is only brings in a few things from remote to fill in where they cannot get anything locally produced. And there's some amazing co-ops that are actually highly, highly profitable, and such a huge amount of more of the sales goes back to the farmer and producer. And so it makes their business model possible. One of them is this one, Ozark Natural Food Co-op in Fayetteville, Arkansas, which Chase worked at for a while, right? And we went there and learned. It's a really cool variety on this. And I talked to them a little bit. They're doing exactly that. As much local, if you can grow it locally, they want to put it on the shelf. And then what they'll do is they'll order from remote only if they cannot get it from a local producer. And so that means that you can show up, and if it's produced locally, you can buy it from local, but you also don't have to go to another store. You can get your more specialty. If you want your chocolate, you can get your chocolate, right? That sort of stuff. And so you can go to one store and do all your shopping. And the reason it's called a co-op is because you can become a member and you are now a partial owner of the co-op. So, yeah. Okay. And then of course, the last thing is we need resilient community and home kitchens. Okay. So we need resilient home kitchens. We're working on a book on that right now. We also need community kitchens. I don't have time to unpack all of that, but we're trying to get some initiatives going for community level kitchens, right? So that local local producers, value-added producers, have places to rent out instead of having to build their own. Okay, and then we need to close the nutrient cycle, which means that we need home-scale composting, especially in urban areas. We need community-scale composting. And I don't have time to unpack all of that, but you guys know what I'm talking about. We need to actually put in place, as part of these community food security functions, the closing of the cycle. Okay, and there you go. Those are my slides for my second presentation. I just wanted to hit through them really quickly. Yes.
Real quick, one more model that's becoming more and more popular. and
Yes.
I'm a member of one. The private membership / private ministry
Yes.
model. I've got information for one that's in Knox County if anybody wants to find me.
Okay. Perfect. Let's go ahead and finish it. We're going to send you down to Jack here in just a moment. So
One thing is about, what I'm seeing here
Yeah.
is primarily vegetation and fruit
Mhm.
like that. Have you run across any models of animal processing?
oh yeah,
For,
Yeah.
say,
Yeah.
ruminants and
Yeah.
other small animals?
Yes.
Community side.
there's a whole session in here just on that. Remember I said there was 8 sessions, so there's one whole session on that. We just got through the first 2, so I haven't gotten to the rest of it. So
What
yes.
was the name of the documentary on Cuba?
The community solution, the power of community. Power of community. Yeah. Yes. All right. So thank you all. Hopefully that was helpful to get you thinking about community food security. You're welcome.